You want to kick us off?
Yes, I would love to. Hello, everybody. My name is Amy Belwanzo, and I am a fractional CMO, and my company is called Spark CMO. And the reason it's called that is because oftentimes marketing can be the spark that really kind of ignites revenue and impact for nonprofit organizations. And especially when they haven't necessarily implemented marketing strategies, but it's time to get strategic and really think about how they're growing and how they're building. So happy to be here today, and I'll pass it off to you, Charlie, to do your intro.
For sure. My name is Charlie Bauer. I'm the Executive Director of Measurement Resources Company. We are a research, evaluation, and organizational development firm, and we have a service called Fractional Performance Management, which we'll talk about in a little more detail today. And I will kick it to you, David, for your introduction.
Perfect. David Kaplan, CEO and founder of Panoramic Strategy. And we are also a fractional CFO accounting and bookkeeping firm only for nonprofits and social enterprises. So, we've been fortunate enough to work with, 100 plus folks, including some in the room today. So and with you, Charlie. So we have some shared work together. So looking forward to having our time here today. So thanks for doing this.
You bet. And I also want to do she's behind the screen that says Measurement Resources, but Nola Klein put together this event today and did a lot of the heavy lifting to make this possible for all of you. So I want to shout out to Nola Klein on our team for Measurement Resources. All right, so this is us and our companies on this slide, and I'll just give you a little bit of a overview out loud of what the day, the hour or less, it'll be much less than an hour, looks like for all of you, and some housekeeping rules. We are recording this so that if you have to leave early, you can finish it at another time, or if you have a colleague you want to share this with, they could watch it at another time. So hopefully that's great with you. The order of our activities are we're going to talk a little bit about some of the nonprofit challenges. I suspect you guys know many of them or all of them because you're in this world. We're going to define what we mean by fractional services here, and it's slightly different for each of the three of us presenters, but pretty close in general. We show you some samples and some real life client examples of how we work with some nonprofits and organizations out there. We'll give you the why of fractional services, why it might make sense for you, and then discuss a little bit about it, if it's right for you, and then some steps to getting started on the process of thinking about or hiring or engaging a fractional person or company. And then we have time for Q&A. And then for housekeeping, we do have time at the end for Q&A, but if you have something, the best way to do it is probably just put it in the chat, and one of us will restate your question from the chat out loud, and we'll sort of go through it in real time if it makes sense, or postpone an answer if we have another slide that covers it. If you can, keep your mic muted, it would be nice. And yeah, Q&A at the end. So without further ado, I'll kick it off myself and talk just about some of the nonprofit challenges that we face. We are not a nonprofit, but we, as working with them, we're facing them together with our clients. I think David and Amy could agree to that. And if you have more challenges, drop them in chat that you want to talk about, because maybe there's an opportunity to discuss. Growing demands for nonprofits. Communities are increasingly relying on nonprofits to fill the gaps from the public sector. There's probably a longer academic debate about what that means long term, but it's a reality right now is that nonprofits are filling the gaps. And in addition, funders and stakeholders are increasingly expected to have measurable outcomes and greater impact with fewer resources. And I would also say, as resources get stretched and concerns about federal funding happens, the ability to demonstrate our impact, financial, marketing metrics, or performance metrics matters more than ever. And the funding landscape becomes more competitive with scarce resources, and so our ability to sort of have data-driven responses is particularly important. Limited budgets. I think we can all agree this is real for many. Nonprofits are used to stretching every dollar and making do as much as they can with as little as they have, and often balancing essential operations with sort of new programming or innovation. The competition for grants and donations is fierce, and that is a challenge for everybody, for your staff, for your infrastructure, and for your innovation. And capacity gap. So depending on the size of your nonprofit, I don't know, from some of the groups I know on here, there's some nonprofits with 1 or 2 staff people. If you have 1 or 2 staff people, there will be gaps in your knowledge and wherewithal to do some things. And that might be in marketing, it might be in finance, it might be in program management or evaluation, but there will be some. And that also, gaps can also include technology as well as people. And so we wanted to mention these sort of 3 things. If there's anything else, feel free again to drop in the chat on some of our challenges. Cool. David, I've got this one for you.
No, absolutely. I think it's important just to step back and say, what does fractional actually mean at the end of the day? And for a lot of folks have different ways of thinking about it. And from our standpoint, and it as a team that jumps in to be your partner, right? I think at the end of the day, fractional means partnership with a really specific set of expertise that's going to accelerate your mission. And so, oftentimes, right, you would see fractional versus outsource. Fractional means we're in it with you. We're here, we're in the game, and, supporting your mission on a day-to-day basis. And that can happen in a lot of different ways. But at the end of the day, it's about partnership and how we show up as your support system. And so in our case, for us, we bring bookkeeping, accounting, CFO work, strategy, mergers, all these things together to support organizations, and we do it in a team approach. Amy, yours might be a little different, so maybe nice to hear from you on this also, because you bring a different and I think also refreshing approach to this.
Yeah, absolutely. I typically act as a solopreneur, and there are a lot of fractional executives who do. I do have resources to bring on, additional creative work and things as needed. But as a solopreneur, I really do act as kind of that fractional chief marketing officer who comes in and can take a higher level look at your planning. And with the experience of having been in the shoes of a vice president or CMO of an organization, I can kind of say, okay, here's the big picture of what we need to do for marketing planning, and I can help align the resources and really just act as the vice president or the CMO or the acting marketing executive on your team would act.
And so I think that's a really great point of being the leader alongside folks, and sometimes it's the leader. And Charlie, you all, right, sometimes come in, at a different spot in the journey. So it might be good to hear from you here as well, because I think it just gives some flavor to options for people.
Yeah, so for us, the fractional can mean it's often multiple people. It's often multiple people with different skill sets. We have quantitative analysts or qualitative researchers or more senior strategic people thinking at more of the board level kind of strategy level. And we are sometimes asked to sit in on a board meeting and provide some results from our fractional work. And sometimes we are just but we are data analysts who are given projects that are due by the end of the week, as if they were an extension of the nonprofits team. Yeah.
It's all great. So no, I think, as you think about what fractional means to you, right, I think hopefully that these 3 perspectives give you, just a different way to look at it, another lens through which to look at this question of fractional services. So, Charlie, how about we go to the next slide?
Yeah. Why don't you kick us off, David?
Perfect. And one of the best parts, in my opinion, about the idea of fractional, is that nonprofits are able to leverage multiple fractional things. I think it's why we're all sitting in the room together. And if you look at a few of the places where Charlie and I have had the good fortune of being able to do fractional work together, so where finance and research, are the data that can fuel the messaging and storytelling of marketing, that can be the flywheel as a big part of your mission. We've been able to do this for ROX and the Women's Fund and BESA together over the last number of years, just as 3 examples for the 2 of us, let alone all across the board. But what I would at least point out here is that these organizations, just on this list, let alone the hundreds that we work with together, or in total rather, are of really, really different sizes. You can do fractional work as a small organization. You can do fractional work as, in our case, a multi-billion-dollar organization. It is truly, you should not feel excluded from the idea of fractional. And the idea of that it is quote unquote expensive. I think instead you should say, what do I need and when? And these are some great examples in our community where we already are making a big impact today.
Yeah, and if I can jump in there, I can maybe give sort of a concrete example of the two companies I work with pictured on the slide. Rev1 Ventures and the Reynoldsburg Destination Marketing Organization are a really good example of like two ends of the spectrum. Rev1 has a marketing team. The team needs some kind of some guidance and some leadership. They had a CMO who has been promoted to COO, and she's now president and COO. So it's just kind of a matter of having a little bit of a needing to sort of backfill where she's gone on to some evolved duties to help give that leadership to the team. And Reynoldsburg DMO, on the other hand, has been operating for 20 years as just one guy part-time with some sort of help here and there. And he just really needs, strategy and needs kind of that plan to move forward and help grow his organization. So it really can be, any side of the spectrum. And obviously, bigger and more developed even still. So it's if that helps just as a picture of different ways that fractionals might interact. And that's on the marketing side, of course. But you guys might have a quick example from your side.
Yeah, thank you,
You just
Amy.
called out.
Go
Oh,
ahead,
sorry.
David.
Yeah, the idea I think that you just brought up is really the inflection points of an organization, whether it's startup or big change, or it's that partnership and growth and change and impact ongoing. And it can happen at different points, or it can be an ongoing relationship. And I think that's just your examples, I think, really highlighted both here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both. I will add, I first met David as I am a board member of BESA. So we are I'll call it smallish nonprofit, about 15 staff members, under $2 million budget. And David was at every board meeting, and took me a minute to understand his role, but he was not a voting board member, but he was effectively a strategic board member as the fractional CMO of BESA. So we do not have, sorry, a CFO. We do not have a chief financial officer. I'm not even sure there's a bookkeeper at BESA. So David and his team function as that part of the operation and organization of BESA. And then, is that about right?
Yeah, that's about right.
Thank you. And then more recently, Measurement Resources partnered with ROX to become their fractional performance and analytical department. We don't sit on board meetings, but I know David does as their fractional CFO. So that's kind of a neat partnership there. Freedom a la carte is also a small nonprofit here in town that deals with human trafficking, and they run a cafe downtown. We are a very tiny, modest partner with them, but we are their data department, and it's a modest month-to-month arrangement with them. And then I also want to add, because I noticed that Amy Claben from Families Flourish joined. We started as program evaluators with them, and we have grown to what I haven't specifically called fractional performance managers with Amy and her team, but I think it's getting close to that because we're doing a lot of great work with them. And Amy is a great partner too, so I don't have her logo up here, but thanks for joining, Amy. So, yeah. And then I will also add, our firm does work across the country, and Western Youth Services is in Orange County, California, and they are a $40 million nonprofit serving youth and young people primarily in behavioral health. And we've been partners with them for the better part of 10 years as kind of their data and performance department. All right. So why, David?
Why do it? It's, to me, I think it starts with having the right people in the right place at the right time. And that's, when you know that you have a need in your organization and there's a real question about capacity and or capabilities, there's a really great chance to say, you know what, let's take a look at this and say, what do I really need? And I think the beauty in our case of having bookkeeping, accounting, and CFO is that you can almost never hire that single person that's going to cover all of those best, and that for the similar price and sometimes even less, you're able to get the best of all of these things. And I think that's a big, like, if I had to pick one, to me, it's right people, right place, right time for the right amount of time, that you need. As we think about the next one, it's that when you bring on someone like us, you're getting skill sets, but you're also getting the ability to flex up and down. That as your world changes, as you scale, hopefully, because we all serve mission-based organizations and we want those missions to grow, that at the end of the day, it's about being able to grow and or change with you. And so it's a big part of the story is, Bessa, for example, Charlie, when we started, was less than $500,000. And now, at, 2.5 million, we are continuously adding resources. Or when a big opportunity comes up, when the Gates Foundation, when, massive, opportunities come your way, you're able to turn to your partners and say, what have you learned from others? And so I think there's that understanding of cross learning as you go through this. And if we put the last one up, ultimately, I don't know if it's the last one, I think we have one more. It is that whole diversity of experience that we have. We've worked with your size organization, we've worked with many others that also crosses sectors. And it also means that we can often make the kinds of introductions and relationships to people that will also accelerate your success. And at the end of the day, we're here for you. We're here for your mission, for your needs, and for the people that you serve. And so when you work with us, you're able to get those things in the way that you need them together. And if you don't feel that partnership, which I think, Charlie, Amy, and I would all attest to, then right, that's what you want to feel out of this. You don't want to feel a transactional relationship. The way we structure it, just like Charlie said, of retainer partnership, you want to be able to make that call and know that you have the person on the other line's full attention and total commitment to your mission in that moment. And that I think is the most important. But Charlie, Amy, is there anything that you would add to this list that I missed here?
So we have scalable to the org's evolving needs on the slide, which is a good point, because oftentimes if you're working with a fractional, you may be able to kind of scale up or down with that same person. And regardless, it's the ability to scale without necessarily having a full-time employee on your payroll, but still kind of gaining those skills. And a lot of times for organizations that are in the process of scaling, you don't go from needing 0 to needing a full-time employee, full-time leader right away. So that ability to kind of scale up through use of a fractional is really valuable.
I love that.
I guess, Charlie, what were you gonna add?
Well, I was going to add a real world example that covers almost all of these things in terms of flexibility, diversity of experience, and scalability. Is our work has recently started with the Community Housing Network, CHN. Jennifer there said to me quite clearly, she said, I want a full-time person in the position of performance and data, but I want to start with a fractional so that I see what that looks like and what my needs will be in a year or 18 months. And so she has access to our team, which includes public policy, public health, a PhD in anthropology, master's degree in biostatistics, and IO psychology. And so we, in the course of the next year with them, they will see which of those people on our team so they get the most value from, and they'll know how they're going to hire a full-time position or stick with us. And so that diversity of experience and also flexibility in time. So we typically start a contract with say, we're going to commit like 12 hours a month or 8 or 16, but we can dial that up or down quite easily depending on the needs of the organization. If it goes up, we can add it. If it goes down, we can subtract it. And so that's been a kind of a great way to do things. And like you said with Vesa, growing from a couple staff to 15, those kinds of things this model of fractional really helps with that.
And I'll make one more point, then maybe we'll turn it to the next slide for Amy, which ultimately I think one of the big reasons to do it early. So sometimes the question is when, which I think is coming up a lot in the chat, and I think I'll transition well to the next slide, is that the earlier that you do it, the better set up you are with best practices. So we bring all of that experience across organizations, and when you have a strong foundation of process, systems, and relationship, that growth is a lot easier than when you are doing it from a place of urgency or fear or scarcity. And so, doing it earlier on often is what makes the most sense. Or rephrased, I think some of our best partnerships are when it was done early on. And and it doesn't change that it can be a great decision later on too. But I think it's important to think about the when, and we're seeing a lot of questions about that. So Amy, I think they're chomping at the bit for your next slide.
All right.
All right.
So the next slide is going to sort of talk about a process and how you might go about implementing fractional support. So there are, more than one way to do it, but we've put together a few steps. Charlie, you might have to, there you go. So number one is to assess capacity and look at that in terms of what would we do if there was more time? What are the things that we would like to do, but we can't get to, whether it's time or expertise or just not sure how to start that, but big, components of things that are missing in your business that just don't seem like you're going to be able to make them happen. And then why isn't it happening? And what would it mean to your business? So if it's something that's going to drive growth, something that's really going to drive your business forward that needs to happen, that's a good reason to look at, here's why we need to add fractional, here's why we need to add this support. Second step would be to evaluate capabilities. So look at this in terms of what skill sets are on your team within your organization, and then what skill sets do you need that would help accelerate the organization's impact? What is it that maybe is a component that's missing, and what's held you back from getting those skill sets? Is it because, I think somebody said earlier that you don't always find all the skills in one person, right? So sometimes, having an expert that can bring in a range of skills is a good way to push your organization forward. And the third step is to find the gaps. So where do we need an eye from the outside? This one, David really touched on this in the last slide. When you're working with fractional support, often that person or that organization is going to bring the perspective of having worked with many organizations. And when you're in what you're doing, especially if it's a founder-led organization and you're really focused on what you've been doing, it's kind of hard to even know what you don't know in terms of what's going on outside your organization, what other organizations are doing. I know, especially in the nonprofit community, a lot of us are very, very well connected, and there's a lot of collaboration and sharing between organizations, and that's absolutely great. But there's always, a benefit to having somebody who's kind of been in, other organizations, been in other shoes, and can sort of help see from the outside what you're missing in your organization. And who has learned from other organizations really speaks to that. The fourth step is check readiness. Do we have the right person and systems internally to work with an outside partner? I think that's important to mention, because even when you hire something out, if you're outsourcing something, if you're bringing on a vendor, whatever it is, you still always have to have a person to manage that other person, or not so much manage, but just interact with and make sure that you're conveying the needs, that you're conveying the vision that you need the other person to accomplish. So without having the right person and systems, it can be your challenge to kind of get what you need to out of it. And then can a fractional role support your team? So this is an important one that I see, where oftentimes if you have an internal team, they might just lack leadership to kind of up their own skills. That happens a lot in my industry, where, in marketing, there might be a great team. They just maybe haven't kind of reached that strategic level. And it's hard if there's not a marketing person available to help, guide them in reaching that strategic level. And the only way you can really get there sometimes is through experience. So oftentimes a fractional can really be a support to your team. It can really provide mentorship for your team. And then we had a question in the chat that I thought fit well into this slide. Let me find it real quick here. So we need a development person, but we need a plan first. Is this type of personalized planning something fractional support can do? So we've kind of outlined the 4 steps here, but I'd also just like to say, I've seen RFPs from companies who weren't exactly sure what they needed, and you could kind of tell by that in their RFP. And I've also talked to some company leaders or some organizational leaders who knew they needed help, but they didn't know what to put in an RFP. They weren't sure how to approach it. So it really kind of stalled them. And my advice has always been just ask in your RFP, ask the fractional leader to help develop your plan. That's part of what you're bringing a fractional on for, is to help you know what you don't know. So if you're sort of struggling to outline the role, sometimes that's exactly where a fractional can help, is in just determining how you need to go forward. So if that's really a hang up, there's 4 good steps to kind of get started on this slide here. But if you don't feel like you have the whole picture, I think that's still something you can, rely on the fractional to help fill in the picture for you. Have Charlie or David, do you have any additions on that? Would you have an example of where you've kind of helped a person outline what it was that they need?
I'm happy to do a quick jump in, because I think, the question in the chat, from Kel on the question of the development side is one that happens a lot in the nonprofit space, and can happen in any of our fields. And so I think you absolutely can be asking for the plan, as you're thinking about the people that you need to have on board. And this really comes back to the capabilities and gaps that you're trying to figure out. What do I want to have in-house versus what can I fill in from the outside? And so I think there's a few really good firms in town, happy to follow up with them later, who have done plans for our clients on the development side, and then folks are able to hire the development person. That can happen in research and marketing and finance as well. But what we find more often than not is that once you get into these partnerships, when you're trying to truly have a partnership, then you end up saying, oh, I see how this works, and it's a great way to dip my toe in the water and get started too. So if you find yourself saying, well, I just need a plan for that, Amy, I think it just reinforces your point of, yes, definitely reach out to the partner and see if they can do the plan, because that might just be a great first step to see where they're a great fit in the journey itself. And Charlie, I think that plays really well into the next steps here. So, kick it back to you.
Sure. That's a great question. So let's talk a little bit about next steps. I'm afraid my screen is not keeping up, but I can't. Are you guys still on is fractional support right for you?
No, I see your next slide. We have budgeting exercise as step
okay,
1.
good. It's there it is. All right. Great. So it's got I'm jumping ahead here, but we want to start with the budgeting exercise. So actually, to that question about am I ready to hire a development manager? I would start with that question with a budgeting exercise. There's a market rate right now for hiring a development manager, and whether that's a development coordinator or manager or chief development officer, you have some level of thinking about how much it's going to cost to hire that person. So starting about what you think you have and can spend is important. I often start the budgeting work with someone who is hiring maybe an analyst or a program evaluator, and I will start and challenge them to say, look, you're going to spend a certain amount of money on that person. I don't know if that number is 50,000 or 60 or 62 plus benefits plus all the costs associated with hiring a person. And I said, challenge Charlie to say, what can you do for less money than that? Because that's ultimately the interesting part about fractional services. It's not always about less money, but often it is, because you may not need, when you're doing that budgeting, you may say, I want a person that does all these skills, but I don't really have 40 hours a week for them or 50 hours a week for that person. So you're not only budgeting the money, but budgeting the work and the time that you think you might need. Because I always am trying to challenge people to say, you really maybe don't need or can't afford a 45-hour person a week. And sometimes it's both. And so I'm always challenging ourselves and our team to say, what can we do for less money than that organization would get from hiring a person? Explore and research, look up fractional companies. There's the 3 of us. There might be others. I have no idea. But ask as many questions as you can. Take as many meetings as you can. I'm in the business of sharing what we do out in the world, and I love talking about this stuff. And I'll have a meeting with anyone to share what we do, talk about costs, talk about propositions, proposals. And I think I speak for Amy and David. Clearly, you love to have those kind of meetings with people to share what you do. Interviews, yeah, that's the same thing. A Zoom interview for 30 minutes is almost free for you. It's time, it's real, but like taking 30 minutes to talk to someone and ask a bunch of questions is a great way to start. And I would start with, what do you think you're going to like? I'm always, again, sorry for hammering this home, but to me, fractional is the value proposition is against some other alternative way of doing what you want to do, which is a full-time person or a part-time person or some other way to do it. And so I'm always saying that in that interview process, I'll try to understand what you want and need to accomplish and how to figure out how to do that within your budget or less than you thought you might spend on that. And if all goes well, you have you reach the apex and you have fractional support and you save some money and get exactly what you needed. The next slide, I love, Amy put this one together, and it shows you sort of what fractional leadership and fractional support looks like in a matrix compared to some other models. So hopefully everyone can see this, and I'll let Amy take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to say I didn't put it together, but I found it and I thought it was good. So here it is. This kind of outlines, Charlie mentioned, fractional is an alternative to, whatever option you might have been considering. So oftentimes these are the options, or these are the things that most likely come up in the consideration set: full-time employee, a consultant, a freelancer, and an advisor. So this slide kind of talks about what you expect in each area. I think time commitment is one of the key areas. And I would say it's not just time commitment in terms of, number of hours per week, but is it a short-term need? Is it like a project or something that you need to sort of get over a hump, so to speak? Or is it a long-term need where you have a gap in your team that you need to fill? So a fractional would be kind of that gap, as opposed to, here's a project. Although Charlie, you said sometimes you might do, we need data report by the end of the week. And I absolutely have done some kind of like leadership for a specific set time for a project that needed a higher level leader. So not necessarily ruling that out, but typically a fractional can provide you that long-term support.
Yeah.
And the strategic input level is important too when you're looking at either fractional or full-time. That's going to be high on the strategic level. That's going to be somebody who's been there. That's going to be somebody who can sit with your leadership team and really kind of talk through, as opposed to maybe somebody who's really focused on, a specialized need or a matter at hand, such as consultant, freelancer, etc. I think those are kind of a lot of the top things to hit. Also, risk to company is kind of a good one to point out, just in contrasting, do I need a full-time person? Do I need an employee, or do I need a fractional? Because that's kind of what fractional does, is really cuts down that risk of going through the whole process of hiring a full-time employee, especially if you aren't sure that you're going to be able to support one yet. I've heard a couple times these guys say sort of dip your toe in the water, or kind of get that test run, if you will. But it's a much less risk way of doing it than going forward with hiring a full-time employee. Ownership of outcomes is also important to hit. I think when you're working with a fractional, I always kind of say the responsibility is mine at the end of the day. If I'm, running these pieces of your marketing for you, I'm looking at the results. I'm making sure that we're doing what needs to be done to drive results. And, at the agreed upon retainer, I'm going to get these results. And I'm sure, Charlie and David, you would say the same thing. When you're working oftentimes with consultants or agencies, freelancers, sometimes, we've agreed to do this project and we're going to do it. And then there you go. So there's not always that sort of like back end, I'm sticking around, I am being accountable, and, making sure that this is a good long-term solution. Cost predictability might be another good one for anybody who's been working with an agency. And this may apply more to marketing than your areas, gentlemen. But oftentimes I've heard that as kind of a complaint with marketing agencies, is just the unknown of, you can do your project cost, but it might increase drastically depending on, if your scope changes a bit or things like that happen. But with a fractional, you really can kind of outline in your contract what, to know what that cost is going to be, so you have that predictable ongoing cost. I think those are kind of some of the highest ones to hit. But if you guys see any other things on this list that come up a lot in questions and conversations, speak up.
I really like this slide, Amy. Thank you. And there's a lot to digest on there. And if someone's got a question on this one, this is a great time to ask it because we do go into Q&A after this anyway, but this one really covers a lot of good info, I think.
Mhm.
My next slide is Q&A. So please ask, but also I'll kick it back to this. I'll kick it back to the previous slide so that we have it in front of us. How about that? But it's Q&A
Yes.
time.
In the chat, we have the question, who do we talk to about fractional services for HR and maybe COO roles? I would have to research know those answers. Charlie or David, do either of you have colleagues or answers that you'd like to speak to?
If you we use a woman in HR. Her name is Jody Siegel. She used to work for the Ohio Environmental Council, and now she's an independent consultant. And I don't remember the name of her team.
Big Change.
What's that?
Big Change Consulting.
Big Change Consulting. Wow, it's a small world. I love Jody. I think I'm not sure it's exactly fractional HR, but we have used her for updating our manual and doing some other HR activities project-based. But I think she's a great person and somebody great to know. Jody Siegel, Big Change Consulting. There's probably others, and yeah.
You know, another strategy when you're smaller in this space is some what are called PEOs, preferred employment organizations, offer outsourced HR within their platforms and offer individualized resources to them. Some do, some don't. So you need to be careful as you make your choice. So that would be one on the HR side that you could consider as another tactic. Actually, I'd argue most of our nonprofit clients that are in the small to medium size range end up using a PEO to save time and cost on that side of the world, particularly as it related back to benefits. COO is a really hard one to get fractional. And I've seen it a few different times, and I'm going to be really honest, that's a really hard one to do because it's a big part of every process versus a portion of the processes. And that I think is a good delineation between kind of what you would see from us, where we insert ourselves in one area versus someone that you need to be crossing a lot of them. And that's just something to think about for you is where are those, what do I have to have as a capability and where can I leverage fractional best? So when we see COO, we see people do more project-based work, you know, and you know, GTD, you know, is one of them. You know, and you know, another one that's come up over the years is I don't remember Lauren Edwards' company in town, but she's done some work that we've collaborated on as well. So there's some people out there that can help in this area.
What other questions do folks have?
Anything?
Looks like we've been so informative that we we left
Covered
no
it all.
questions.
Oh,
May I have a couple messages? Oh, there we are. That's us.
well, thank
Is
you,
there
Amy. Oh,
there's a good question in the chat. You know, is there a minimum spend to get good results? And the answer is, of course, any good consultant will say it depends. But the answer should be yes. Yeah, there is a minimum spend because you just need a certain number of hours, in my opinion. Now, Amy, Charlie, you know, feel free to have a different opinion here. You need to have enough dollars and time invested for someone to get to know your organization. There's a learning curve minimum that you can't just look in 10 minutes, but it also doesn't have to be 10 hours to be able to get to that learning curve before you're actually able to add value. And so I think there is a minimum. And I can say from our end, like if you're doing an ongoing partnership, you know, you're talking at the lowest $1,500 a month, or on a project basis. For us, it's like $5,000 to $10,000 is typically the lowest project size that we do. But I don't know if that's something that Charlie and Amy, just for scale and scope for people, might be helpful to get from you as well.
Yeah, I could add to that to say it's I wouldn't always look at it specifically as a minimum spend, but a minimum time limit. You know, you want to give, if you're looking at somebody who's going to be impacting a higher level of the planning and the strategy in your organization, you're going to need a few months for that to take effect. It's not something where it's like, oh, well, we gave it a try for a month. But I really do advise you need to let it, let it take effect, just like you would, if you were hiring an employee. You got to let the onboarding happen and kind of let the person enact their plans. So whatever the monthly fee is, or the retainer, however you've set up your payment agreement, plan to let that go for 3 to 6 months. I would say would be a good minimum. But in your areas, Charlie and David, you might have a different time range.
Yeah, as a starting point, like a short-term project for us is a couple months and $4,000 or $5,000, 2 to 3 months, and that may be more of a project than a fractional service, but that gives you a sense of scale. So if we've done sort of year-long fractional engagements for around $10,000 as a sense of scale. That's sort of a minimum monthly amount of work that we kind of want to get invested in. But I would also add, like, a good consultant is like, until we scope it and hear what the needs are, I'm reluctant to say too much, because we try to get creative with the size of the organization. But usually we're thinking about, all right, how many months, how many hours per month, and then we go from there.
Yeah, there's also, with a lot of clients, I'll see you can kind of step down sometimes, especially if the client has internal team that you can help guide to enact the plan. There's a lot of planning, a lot of upfront work, so you might see a heavier retainer at the beginning, and then after a few months, you're able to kind of step that down to more of a consulting level, if you will, to the couple thousand a month or something like that.
Yeah. I didn't address earlier, but I saw we talked about Kelsey's question earlier about development person and planning. I'll just add, when we do strategic planning, we always see stuff about fundraising and development as part of the strategic planning next steps, the 3-year plan. They want to add more development people, raise more money, etc. And I always say that if you talk to somebody like David or me or maybe Amy, in terms of how you think about development, sometimes you have a conversation about what do you really want from development and what's it going to cost before you go out to market to hire someone. So I always ask people, are you going to pay someone $60,000 to raise $15,000 per year? Because that's an interesting math problem and worth talking through with someone.
Well, we like interesting math problems, Charlie.
Me too.
But it does come, into the organizational structure question and how you fit into this. So, when you think about, like, an org chart is another really good visual that you can say, right? Oftentimes what I think success in our world is when we are on the org chart, that we are enough of a partner, that we are seen as an essential element of the organization that can't be ignored. And so when you look at your org chart, as you leave today, I would ask you to think about, what do you wish was on your org chart, and what would it do for you? And when you can answer those 2 questions, you're ready to make that call, whether it's us or someone else. And even if it's us connecting you to someone else, we just want your missions to succeed, because it's the people we serve in our community every day. And we're grateful to all of you for everything that you do. And frankly, it's what fuels our missions. So, I'll just express my gratitude, especially in the times we live in right now. And I know how hard it is for every single nonprofit going through the uncertainty and the journey. And just know that whether it's a partnership in a formal way or being your partners in the community, just know that we're all here for you.
I love that.
Well said.
That is great, David. Thank you. I will say thank you to Amy and David for being partners on this webinar. It's been great fun to work with you both. Amy, any parting words for the group?
Not really, other than I think you've got a good group here to specifically speak to mission-driven and nonprofit organizations. There are a lot of resources that are in a lot of areas, and the group on the screen here is passionate about serving our mission-driven organizations.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything, and have a great rest of your day and week.
Thank you all.
All right. Bye, guys.